Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our strategic conversation today with Adel Abdellatif. He is the strategic advisor at the United Nations Development Program for the Regional Bureau for Arab States. Adel, thank you so much for joining our strategic conversation today. You're in New York, and quite a lot of excitement outside your window, I imagine, as well. There's a curfew on, right?
Yeah. And thank you very much for inviting me for this conversation. Glad to see you, Shada.
Yes, it's wonderful to see you, Adel. I follow you on Twitter, of course, and UNDP is a very cherished partner of Friends of Europe. So we're grateful that you're here. So friends watching online, we've been recording and talking to a number of inspirational figures during this lockdown, because we've all been in various stages of lockdown across the world. We've talked to European policymakers, we've talked to Asians, we've talked to Africans, we've talked to Latin Americans. And today with Adel, we're going to explore ways in which COVID-19, the pandemic, has impacted a region which is already in the midst of violence, tension, wars, and conflicts. And on top of that, governments and people have to deal with this pandemic as well. So we can imagine how difficult it is. As I said, wars are ongoing, or there's some lull, but that global ceasefire that Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, wanted, well, the response to that hasn't been very overwhelming, if you like. Just a word, this is a pre-recorded online conversation. Due to technical issues, we've decided to pre-record some of our strategic conversations. That means that you can't send in questions online, but many of you have already written to us and from our network. So the questions that I'll be putting to Adel have a lot to do with your comments and your concerns. So Adel, let me just kick off with that first point that I made to you, that this is a region that is already torn and buffeted by, unfortunately, by violence, civil wars, and terrorist activities, etc. So what has the pandemic done more as regards governments, agencies, and governments' ability to deal with the societal problems and the economic and political issues? Just a wide picture, please.
Yeah, the situation, of course, is overwhelming. And if I make the analogy with COVID-19 itself, we noticed that the patients, most of the time, the most decisive factor, to continue is what is the condition of your health before being infected, before being, tested, positive. That's exactly the situation of this region. It entered, the COVID-19 challenge with a very weak, immune system, if we can say that. Because since 2010, 2011, we have the Arab uprisings. Some countries actually, we have started the civil war in Syria. We have also in Libya. We have also in Yemen, and also the situation in Iraq, actually, with the emergence of ISIS. All these issues actually are coming at the same time, and also an economic crisis in a country like Lebanon, with the debt crisis and the flow of refugees across the borders from Syria to Jordan. All these issues actually happened in the last decade. And then we had actually COVID-19. What also exacerbated COVID-19 is how it is affecting the global economy. And that actually also affected the oil-producing countries in the Arab Gulf states, where these countries actually were a sort of an engine, economic engine in the region, through the foreign workers, and they are sending remittances to their families in many Arab countries, and that actually is affected now. So we are finding now that all the countries, whether they were actually in civil war or the middle income countries were struggling economically, even the rich countries, they have their own issues.
Right.
So that actually put all the region in a very difficult test that we hope, we can see maybe in the discussion, what will be the changes that they may come, and what would be the advice, actually, the course of advice, the course of action that these countries may take.
Absolutely, Adel, absolutely. So we will be looking ahead, and I'd urge you to do so. How do we get out of this very difficult and challenging environment? Because people's lives, children, women,
Yeah.
innocent people's lives are at stake. Let's take the situation one by one, if you like. So Yemen, let's start off with that. A civil war that's been going on since 2015, but actually, you know, even further back, maybe 2011, when the uprisings happened across the Arab world. And recently, the United Nations termed it a macabre tragedy.
Yeah.
Money that was needed, that is needed, fundraising efforts to end the humanitarian crisis on top of the civil, on top of the war, that hasn't come to much. So what would you say is the future for Yemen? How would you like this to take shape now that we are in this other crisis as well?
Well, the challenge with Yemen, you know, that even if you go back 2010, you know, and 2011 when the Arab uprising started, and some, of course, the protests started in Yemen, Yemen was not actually doing very well when it comes to the Millennium Development Goals. So 2010, we had actually 5 years, 2015, you know, the 15 years for the Millennium Development Goals. So it was lagging already behind. So when all this happened, you know, the civil war, of course, all the gains, the very few gains actually that has been achieved, it's almost lost. And now we have almost 20 million people in Yemen. They need food. They are actually food insecure. And that situation, in fact, you know, it's very difficult to say what will be the future, because when we think about the future, we think all the time in a positive way, but we shouldn't try, in fact, think about negative way. The most important thing, if it happens, you know, is how a ceasefire can start putting things back in order and help, you know, the people in Yemen to start improving, you know, and getting some of the few gains that achieved before. I wouldn't try, you know, to give a very dark picture, because the picture is already dark. And we know that we don't have even a very clear picture about the number of Yemen because of the lack of testing, you know. So even if we say it is 200, 300, 400, it doesn't mean anything, you know, because the whole country doesn't have a public health system. It collapsed. And people actually are almost armless, you know, in front of COVID-19. They don't have any defense system, whether physically or a health system that can protect them. So that's actually the situation where we stand, you know, that we have a huge number, millions of people that cannot actually have access to any health or any support. In order, of course, to start thinking, you know, about how this can change, of course, the most important thing is the end of hostility and end of using violence, you know, because that...
And that has not happened.
And that actually unfortunately, it did not happen until now. Maybe there are, you know, less violence than before, but of course that doesn't mean anything, because you need also to reach an agreement in order to start, you know, working on moving from the humanitarian to development. That didn't happen, unfortunately, until now. But you know, we hope, you know, that this global crisis may put more pressure on all the actors, you know, and give some wisdom, you know, about what is the point actually to continue having this kind of hostility. Already, you know, everybody's affected by COVID-19.
Absolutely. So it's become a geopolitical game. It always has been a geopolitical game. But is this the time for those kinds of dangerous games to be played in one of the most poorest, most vulnerable parts of the world? Yeah. Thank you, Adel. Let's move on to another crisis, another area, war zone, if you like, conflict and confrontation. Syria, ISIS, Iraq. We don't really hear much about that at the moment. And there were some news reports saying that ISIS was now sort of silenced, had disappeared, had been overcome, and that the danger had disappeared. So I was just wondering, what is the real situation there from your point of view, Adel?
I think, you know, it is the danger disappear, and that actually we have noticed that even before COVID-19. The fact that, of course, the international media is focusing, and rightly, of course, on a global crisis with the pandemic, it gives, you know, less attention to issues like ISIS or the growing tension or in some countries in the Middle East. But ISIS, of course, this is maybe, in my view, the ideal situation where the attention, is somewhere else, like what happened even back, if you go back to 2014, the whole attention was in Syria, and ISIS actually emerged, in a very strong way in Iraq. And maybe this may happen, not only in Iraq and Syria, but all the violent extremist group, they have an opportunity now because the attention of the international community and all the countries actually that, were providing support to address ISIS, they having their own problem at home. And the resources, that were used to be deployed, and also the physical presence, of troops, from other countries. Given COVID-19, if anything happened, that would be very difficult to do now. I mean, because all the leaders, of course, will be very cautious about deploying troops when we have this pandemic. That actually is something that we have to monitor very closely, because among the issues that may affect people, is using force, and people, if they start also having another displacement, that will help to spread the virus faster than it's happening now.
What is the incidence of COVID-19 in this area, in this region, generally, Adel?
Well, if you look at the numbers, that is provided by the WHO in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, actually it shows exactly the capacity of countries and the level of wealth. So you will see that you have a lot of cases, for example, in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Kuwait. And that's mainly because of the testing, because they have the capacity to test. And then if you move out of that, to countries like Syria and Yemen, you find very few cases. Maybe it is not as big as these countries because they are not globalized, they don't have international, travelers as countries like United Arab Emirates or the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. But that actually gives you an idea that it's all about testing, If we have more testing, maybe we will have a clearer picture, but because of hostility, it's very difficult. And that's why you will find, that the wave of COVID-19, when it reached countries like Yemen or Syria or countries in conflict, it will stay there. It will, because you cannot have lockdown, you cannot have curfew, you cannot even have, hospitals to. So what we will monitor actually is the number of deaths. That will give us an idea about how big the crisis there. But right. For we will find most of the cases are confined wealthy countries in the Gulf or the middle income countries. We have some numbers from Egypt and Morocco, Algeria. Of course, it is higher, but I mean, these are in the thousands. But when you come to Yemen, you are in the hundreds, or Syria.
Right.
And that because they don't receive a lot of of people, passengers coming from outside, from Europe or Asia. But once it starts, actually, the spread, will take actually a grip there, because there is no capacity, as I said, to address it.
For addressing. And, you talked about oil-rich countries, you talked about middle-income countries, but we've seen recently that, the devastation, the economic devastation being caused by lockdowns, by the decline in consumption of oil, etc., is affecting countries that we once thought were going to be rich forever, oil-producing countries, etc. So what is the impact? How do you foresee how the Gulf countries, which have been, major oil exporters, and that was the engine for the region, but also the engine for the world, how do you see them? Will there be a recovery? Will their economic situation improve, do you think?
We have two groups of countries here in the region that are maybe tightly, linked. We have middle-income countries, country like Jordan, even Lebanon, or Egypt, and we go to the west, Morocco, Tunisia, and you have also the Gulf oil-producing countries. One of the main, actually, characteristic of the middle-income countries was the informal sector. The informal sector actually was absorbing most of the labor in these countries, between 50 even to 70%.
Right.
The lockdown, which actually is a requirement, of course, most of these people lost their jobs. I mean, they cannot go, and they are mainly daily workers. You know, they don't have a monthly salary or a secure job. So we have a huge number of people now that they are staying home. They cannot go to work because of the lockdown, and also because of the diminishing of the economic activity. Even if countries will open up, you know, that doesn't mean, you know, that they will go back to work. And then we have the oil-producing countries. The oil-producing countries, its main importance for the region was actually that it was providing a safety valve for some countries when it comes to jobs. You know, many Jordanians, Palestinians, Egyptians, you know, Sudanese, they work in the Gulf and they send remittances to back home. And these remittances, of course, will be affected because of the decline of the oil prices, the dramatic decline actually. And also countries like United Arab Emirates or Qatar, they were hubs actually for international travelers like Dubai or Doha. Now these airlines actually, they are standstill. They cannot actually function anymore. So the economic model here in the whole region is affected. You know, the pillars of tourism, remittances, oil revenues, all these pillars are affected at the same time. So how this will come back, you know, for the oil producing countries, maybe the situation is much better because they still have some reserves. But that doesn't mean, you know, that in the future they will be able to come back to the same economic growth level that they had before or the strength that they had before. Unless if the oil prices will start to pick up, you know, again in the future. But there is a lot of doubt about that because, you know, it depends also about the economic activity in the world, whether China will come back, you know, to its economic growth or the industrialized countries in the West. That's, of course, a big question mark. And it's you know, it is a bell, you know, ringing bell for all these countries, you know, that they have to start, which we were saying before, that we have to start to diversify their economies and also minimize, you know, the dependence on oil. Besides, you know, I mean, we were working also on reducing emissions, you know. So that's right. That's another element, you know, that was affecting these countries, you know, that the growing, you know, the use of renewables, which actually is something that we have to take into account, you know, to save the planet as well.
So do you think this is a sensitive issue, but do you think there's the wisdom and good governance, leadership to take all of these issues into account and to reinvent the region in the 21st century climate-friendly fashion?
Yeah, actually, we have been saying this, you know, since we started producing the Arab Human Development Report in 2002. The message actually is how to advise government, you know, to start moving, you know, to a more efficient, more, you know, good governance, you know, because many things actually that people now are complaining about is what, for example, the issue of corruption. And how there is no trust between the government and the citizens, you know, in such a situation, you know, in COVID-19, anything that the government would like to do will depend how much there is trust between the citizens and the state. And that's actually came to the test here, you know, the more the people they have trust, of course, the more that the government can come out and the more people will be collaborating with the government and finding solutions. But now we will find, you know, while people sitting at home, you find, you know, this kind of, you know, separation, you know, between and the state, you know. I mean, the only thing, you know, that will get this back together, governments will be able in the few years that come to take measures, you know, to improve this relationship, to open more space for the people to express themselves, as well as, you know, we have to localize issues, you know, how to work more on local development, how to give more power, you know, to local communities and to take decisions, you know. In such situations, you know, anything, you know, decision to be taken to address COVID-19 doesn't need to be capital from the national level, you know. You have to work at the local level. People can take care of many issues, you know, can work, you know, in lockdown and help each other. Exactly. And, you know, the society that can come together better than, you know, having those holistic interventions that coming from the capital.
From the state also, so a non-state sector, civil society.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me talk to you about the region is a young region. You have youth many in unemployment, obviously, but also a source of strength. I mean, you have a potential there, a human potential there. And you also have some very smart women, women who are, you know, university educated and often then don't find jobs or they're working at home, etc. So with the current situation, as you've described it, the economic havoc that's being played, I mean, how are you going to sort of look after the interests of the youth and the more vulnerable people, including women and children? I mean, how are you going to be able to shelter them from the double whammy, if you like, the pandemic and also the economic and social fallout of the pandemic?
Yeah, well, one of the things, actually, I will start with the gender issues because, I mean, it is actually a societal problem in the Middle East before even COVID-19. And when it happened, of course, the lockdown, we noticed, you know, the increase of domestic violence, which happened not only in the region, but also in many other countries. But it shows, you know, how the situation may get worse. And the issue of inequality, because women, you know, their participation in the workforce in the Arab region was maybe among the lowest in the world. So this gives you an idea. If there is a comeback, you know, maybe priority will be given only to men, you know, to come back to work, or for the, you know, that's actually what we are afraid of, that we'll have a setback, you know, in that when it comes to the women's right to work in particular, how they will be getting integrated again in the workforce, and how even, you know, to manage, you know, to keep the gains that we had before. And of course, that also, if we talk also about, you know, the role of women in the workforce is very critical now, because most of the health workers in this region are women. So maybe it is a positive thing to see how women are contributing and how we can build on this, you know, that women are contributing, you know, to shield the society of all, you know, during this pandemic. But also we are very afraid, you know, that women were left behind when it comes, you know, the comeback or the recovery of the economy. The challenge that we also see is, if these countries also accelerate digitalization, maybe this will be an opportunity for women to start or work from home, because the proof now that digital transformation is not a luxury, and you need it, you know, to continue life until, you know, we get out of this pandemic, and nobody knows when it will happen exactly. So maybe this would be an opportunity. So we're trying to look at how we analyze the picture and how also we can find solutions. And that also, when it comes to digital transformation, this is also an opportunity for the young people. You know, they have
absolutely. But if they have access,
if they have access,
if they have access to the computer,
that actually was one of exactly one of the issues, is how you improve access. Because when we look at the digital infrastructure, of course, it is very strong in countries like the oil-producing countries, but it is much less, you know, in countries, in the middle-income countries, and of course, if we let alone, you know, the countries in crisis, you know, they don't have any digital infrastructure. So how middle-income countries we can work on improving, you know, the digital infrastructure, the access, because that actually can create opportunities.
Absolutely.
And activate, you know, the powerful, you know, the power of youth in this region. Because you will find a lot of ideas. You'll find a lot of young, you know, people in the region. They are trying to find solutions, trying to innovate, trying also to find, you know, how they can work from home. And this power actually has to be supported by governments, by providing whatever fiscal space is there. Governments should try now to repurpose their budget, you know, how to invest, you know, in the areas that can actually push the economic growth forward.
So Adel, thank you for that. Now, the final question I'll put to you, we could go on discussing the region for a very long time. And as you said, there's some very serious concerns in many parts of the Middle East, of the Arab states. But I want to ask you, because we have a global audience and I'm based in Brussels, we have a European audience as well. So if there is a message that you would like to convey to EU policymakers, European officials and ministers about how they can help and respond to some of the serious concerns that you have voiced, the economic havoc, but also the vulnerable people, the digital divide that exists, what would you say to them in a minute or two?
Yes, I mean, I would like to start that the European Union have always been supportive to many countries in the region, and not only on the humanitarian level, but development level. But I think this crisis, it proves, that solidarity is the most important thing, and the Arab countries, the Mediterranean, the Southern Mediterranean is very close to Europe, even than sometimes, many other regions in the world. And the fact, that continue this kind of solidarity and working on development will bring, of course, prosperity to the south of the Mediterranean, which is actually can help, to address also many challenges in Europe itself, reduces migration, providing, the opportunities, reducing also the violent extremism. And I think, in Europe, the European Union has been always trying to provide support, but I think there are reforms also in the Arab countries that has to take place. It's not only support from, Europe that will change things, and I think there is a huge goodwill from the part of European countries collectively and the European Union itself. But the Arab countries also should take, bold measures now to work on reform, provide opportunities for the young people, try also to address, the structural issues when it comes to the governance, building the trust of people. And of course, Europe can help a lot in that because of the experience that they have, also the support, not only financially, but also the knowledge that Europe has been going through. It has a very rich history that the region can learn from. Building bridges between think tanks is very important. Building bridges, between the academia and the civil society as well. I don't see things, only confined, the role government to government, but you have also private sector, which is very important, civil society, think tanks. And I think, we have to get out of this situation by thinking positively and looking at how we can achieve what we were looking before, because all of us actually have to look at ourselves with a lot of humility now. In front of this situation, nobody was prepared, and we have to get out of this, prepared for a better future.
Thank you, Adel, for making some very important points. So we talk about this great disruption. Maybe it can also be a great reset of the way we have worked together, but also at home for so many years. You've talked about solidarity, you've talked about the need for humanitarian help, but not just that, also inspiration, reform, how you need to keep the young people at home, jobs, investments, so they're not always tempted to migrate, though we know and we've learned during COVID-19 how essential migrants and refugees are to our own well-being and our prosperity as well. And you've talked about the need for good governance and leadership, and I would say that that is a concern across the world, not just in that region, but across the world. We're seeing some very irresponsible leadership at the moment. And if we are to get this recovery, if we are to find a vaccine against COVID-19, we will just have to work together. So Adel, thank you very much indeed for joining us from New York for this conversation on the Middle East. Many, many issues have not been covered, but we just have 20 minutes to do that. So once again, thank you for answering all our questions. And thank you all of you for watching. This will remain on YouTube and on our website. So anyone interested in talking to Adel, listening to his comments, his very inspirational points of view, you can tune in again and watch it. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you very soon. Adel, it was a pleasure.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.